Hello again, everybody. My name is Brandon Sharpeed. I'm the Executive Director of the Management and Organizational Behavior Teaching Society, and I'm here to help you navigate as a presenter and an attendee our virtual conference coming up in mid-June. So there are a few different rules and expectations and permissions that you would have as a presenter and an attendee in attending any one of our given sessions. So I'm going to run through a few of those right now, as given the size, the scope of this conference, and given how much larger it is than last year's 2020 conference, I will not necessarily have the individualized time that I was able to give every single session a year ago. So we're going to go through a few different rules here and see where, um, where you need to be aware of what your expectations are in being a presenter or being an attendee. So first, we're going to hit things off here with the presenters. And when this is all said and done, I'm going to take you through a visual walkthrough of what your Zoom room will look like, what you can expect in terms of attendees coming in, in terms of your permissions for screen sharing and breakout rooms and all that stuff. So first, let's get through some rules that we have for our presenters. First and foremost, as a presenter, you must pre-register for your session. So while you might be building out your itinerary for other sessions that you want to attend, you must click and pre-register for your specific session that you are presenting for. If you don't pre-register for your session, you're not going to have the unique link in order to access that session. And given the size of this conference, we will not have the ability to reschedule your session. So please, before you do anything else, go into the conference program and pre-register for the sessions that you are presenting at. Second, please note that throughout the entirety of this conference, from the beginning of the 16th through the conclusion on the 19th, we have 7 sessions running at almost all times from 10 a.m. Eastern until we're going to go as late as 10:30, I believe, p.m. Eastern. So this is going to be a massive conference, and with that, time in terms of, again, individualized time is going to be a little bit restricted. Now, as a presenter, upon entering the room, you're going to see a slide, and that slide is going to contain a lot of the information that I'm about to go forward with here. So again, I won't have a lot of time to present this information to you. So between this video and that slide, hopefully it gets you, up and running before I end up cycling through into your room. Now, my video on my screen will only be active for at any given moment in the room that I am currently dealing with. So again, 7 rooms, I've got to split that window of 15 minutes or so that I have to get all those rooms up and running before the sessions start across those 7 presenters. So upon my cycling around to you, I will provide each presenter with a co-hosting ability. This was going to grant you screen sharing, whiteboard abilities, and breakout room permissions. If you are utilizing breakout room permissions, and you are working with a co-presenter, please, it is best practice to assign you or your co-presenter to the management of those breakout rooms prior to segueing into them. So whatever the structure of your session is and however you set up this experiential session or a roundtable or what have you, whomever is segueing into those breakout rooms, allow the other presenter to create them and to essentially disperse everybody into those. It's best practice to start your session 3 minutes after its scheduled time. So for example, if your session was to start at 1 p.m., plan on starting it actually at 1:03 p.m. And the reason being is, and I've run several virtual conferences over the past year plus now, the reason being is that the heaviest inflow of attendees is going to come in that 3-minute window from when your start time was scheduled for to that, say, 1:03 p.m. time. So again, whatever your start time is on the schedule, plan on starting at 3 minutes after that time. Whether you're in a 60-minute session or a 90-minute session, please do not allow your session to spill over more than 10 minutes from its allotted time. So again, using a 1 p.m. Example, if your session was supposed to conclude at 2 p.m., I can give you until 2:10 p.m., but please don't go beyond that. At 2:15 p.m. or at 15 minutes beyond your scheduled time, I should say, there's going to be a hard cutoff. Your room is just going to end up being closed out because with each one of these Zoom licenses that we're running these sessions across concurrently, I need to be able to close that room out and open the next room and get that next group of presenters situated. So at 15 minutes after your presenting time was supposed to have concluded, there will be a hard cutoff. Your room will fade to black, and I'll be moving on to the next set of sessions. If your session is slated to work with a large number of attendees, or vice versa, a small number of attendees, please have a backup version of your plan in your back pocket. For example, if you're planning for a session that requires 20 attendees, have a plan for a session that may only have 5 attendees in it. And vice versa. If you're planning for 5 or 7 or 8 attendees and somehow you get 25 or 30 attendees, have a plan for that as well. So have these alternative measures in your back pocket just so you can keep an engaging and productive session going no matter what the scenario that plays out in terms of attendance. If you do require my assistance during the session, it's best that you private message me in the Zoom chat box. That's going to be the easiest way for it to flash and pop up on my screen. I may not get to that chat box immediately. Again, I have to cycle through 7 sessions. I'll be doing that with each one of those chat boxes, but that is going to be the best way to get my attention. At the conclusion of your session, I may not have adequate time to be able to go into your session and kind of close it out with you. So if you don't have any immediate feedback or concerns that you need to relay to me right then and there, feel free to exit your room. And when I see that screen black and I see no more participants in the room, I'll know to close it out and move on to the next session. Now, as a presenter, when you do have your co-hosting abilities, it's important to know that attendees will be sitting in a waiting room prior to attending your session. Now, as a presenter, you will be able to see that waiting room, but you are not to touch anything in that waiting room. And this is very, very critical. It's going to be the job of myself and maybe some other moderators that jump in to check those individuals in the waiting room with names that are on our paid attendee list. If a name does not match up from our registration to that waiting room, that individual will not be allowed. If somebody's calling in on a phone number, we're going to have to check in to see who that individual is before we let that person in. So under no circumstances, no matter how backed up you might see that at any given moment, please know that we will tend to the waiting room and that you as a presenter are not to allow anybody in that waiting room. That is the most critical, or not to allow anybody out of the waiting room, I should say. That's the most critical security measure that I can ask of you. Please do not touch the waiting room. Thank you. So in terms of what your room is going to look like in the Zoom software here, I'm going to bring you into what my screen looks like and then show you what you as a co-host and a presenter would look like. So let's move on over to the Zoom software at this point. Okay, so here we are in Zoom, and while this is through my hosting lens here, it won't look all that different from you for you as a co-host. There's one minor difference that I'll get into later in regard to the permissions. But what we're going to do here is we're going to utilize two co-presenters that are going to come into this room. And whether you're a presenter or an attendee, this would all look just about the same in terms of the process of accessing the room. Now, when these co-presenters come in, they will be up here on the waiting list, and I will allow them into the room and I'll provide them their hosting abilities. Now, if you're an attendee, you too would end up in this waiting list. The only difference is that you won't be provided any kind of permissions. You would just be an attendee without any permissions, but you would have your normal, things like reactions and thumbs up, thumbs down, yes, no, etc. All that stuff. If there's any kind of emoticons or engaging, voting that needs to take place. So first here, let's bring in our two presenters. So if you give me a second here, we will bring in our first one. And there we go. That's John Travolta. It's nice of John to join us. Let's bring John in here. There's John. And let's bring in our co-presenter with John here. And here he is. And Nicolas Cage. They're good friends from back in 1997, I think it was, and it's nice to see them still wearing their masks. Those are bad face-off jokes. So here we are. We have our two would-be co-presenters, but they don't have any permissions yet. So now that they're in the room, and I've checked them off against our registration list in our program as co-presenters, I would click on them. I would assign them co-hosting abilities. Yes, I want to provide John. Yes, I want to provide Nick co-hosting abilities. And at this point, I'm just going to kind of verbalize what the change in the screen would be. You would have gone from a standard toolbar, which would just have your audio, your video, your reactions, etc., to now you would have the green button that would be the share screen, and you would also have breakout rooms on this. So, and you would also have whiteboard capabilities. The one permission that you will not have as a co-host that I would have as a host is polls. So the polling option is only enabled in Zoom by the individual that sets up the meeting, the original host. So if for some reason you desperately need a poll as part of your session, it is best practice, I should say, to reach out to me ahead of time, or at least before the session starts. Just reach out to me either as I cycle through and I greet you, or message me in the chat box with a private message to let me know, hey, Brandon, at such and such a time, we are going to need some polls taken care of. So that's the only restriction that you're going to have in terms of what you will not be able to see or have access to. The other, again, major restriction is as individuals line up here in the waiting list, do not allow them in. Either I or a board member that is acting as a moderator and checking names off against a registration list will be the only people with the actual legitimate permissions to be able to let them in. So please do not ever touch the waiting list. No matter how many people you see in there, no matter if you know their name or not, they could be your best friend, it doesn't matter. Please leave them be. So in terms of an attendee and presenters alike, you are going to enter the room with your microphone muted and your video off. So if you need to show your video, obviously, turn it on. If you need to speak, turn your microphone on, unmute yourself. Now, as an attendee, obviously the presenters are going to be having their microphones on and their videos on. But in terms of the attendees, please leave yourself muted unless you're being actively engaged. The worst thing that you can possibly do is have chit chat on the side, is to have noise in the background, to have a cat. Thankfully, he didn't make any noise, but a cat behind me, which you probably just saw, clawing or meowing or whatever, anything along those lines. Dogs barking, kids running around. All those things can lead to distractions. It can really derail an experiential exercise, a roundtable discussion, a PDW, whatever it may be. So please keep yourself muted unless you're being actively engaged. If you do need to chit-chat, banter, anything tangential, or to even explore a topic that's being discussed more, but on the side and not to interrupt the presenters, do so in the chat box. If there's one thing that I have learned over the course of running these virtual conferences over the past year, it's that the chat box might be the greatest added value to this entire experience, more so than being able to see one another, more so than, the sharing screens and the whiteboards and the breakout rooms and all that stuff. The chat box, I think more gets done in the chat box, and a greater experience is had by utilizing the chat box than any other aspect of this software. So please, whether you're a presenter or an attendee, do indeed utilize the chat box. Be careful of what you're doing in terms of sending private messages. Make sure your private messages are indeed private. I think we've probably all heard or maybe even experienced snafus where something was supposed to be private or was supposed to be to one individual yet it ended up going to another that it wasn't supposed to. Even more importantly, if you are saving the chat box and you intend to share the chat text file, please be sure to strip out your private messages from that file. When you save a chat file, that file will include any private messages that you yourself sent or received from other individuals, but it will include any that you conducted in. So be careful with that, okay? Beyond that, there's not a whole lot else. If you do need me for anything, if you have any questions or concerns or comments, please reach out to me at brandon@mobts.org. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at the conference. Thank you. Take care.